Season 2 of the Hiring Librarians podcast. We talk about hiring, getting hired, and broader career issues for librarians, archivists, and other folks in information service professions. I'm your host, Emily Week. This podcast is part of my work on the site hiringlibrarians.com, where I've spent more than a decade asking questions, complex, stupid, and everywhere in between, to LIS workers on both sides of the hiring table. This episode was recorded on July 24th, 2025. My guests are Lydia Tang and Marcella Huggard. Hello, Hiring Librarians podcast listeners, wherever you may be. I'm excited to be here today with Lydia Tang and Marcella Huggard, and we are going to talk about moving from archives careers to archives adjacent careers. And maybe we'll get started. I'll let each person introduce themselves. So Marcella, do you want to go first and just say a quick about who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Marcella Huggard. I am the Hosting Services Onboarding Coordinator for Lyrasis. Lydia, how about you?
Hi, I'm Dr. Lydia Tang. I'm a Senior Outreach and Engagement Coordinator with Lyrasis.
Something I like to ask on most episodes is just about people's career paths. Marcella, will you tell us maybe first how you arrived in archives and then how you went from archives to what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So when I was an undergrad, several years ago, I was a history major, and I knew I wanted to use that, but not teach. I was not interested in standard classroom teaching. So I went to my Career Services Center. I got internships in archives and museums, and I was hooked. And I knew from those experiences that I was going to have to go to grad school. So I went for my public history degree. Librarianship wasn't even on my radar at that point, but I was also really more focused on getting into history museums. So over the last 20 years or so, I've worked in state archives, academia, in a tenure track position. And about a year and a half ago, I started working with Lyrasis. We're a nonprofit member organization with a mission to help the LAM field and its information sharing needs. I manage onboarding for clients starting in our 4 open source hosted systems. So my background and experience in that variety of institutional types, I think, and also working with both object-based and archival collections really has benefited me in this particular role. And it was also what attracted me to a role, because I can relate to the solo archivists, the government archivists, the museum registrars, all those individuals working at large bureaucratic academic institutions as well. Lydia, how about you?
So I actually fell into working in archives. It's a second career for me. Originally, I was a violinist, and I was a very serious violinist, and I got my doctorate even. I had transitioned to viola performance, and I got my doctorate in viola performance, and I was the typical starving musician. I called myself the freeway philharmonic musician because I would drive to every orchestra throughout the entire state of Illinois. And I was playing every concert I could. I had a full studio of violin and viola students, and I could barely make rent. I was barely making $20,000 a year, and I was desperate. And so I was talking with a colleague in orchestra, and she said, "You should talk to my husband because all of his student workers got jobs and left, and he's shorthanded." And he ended up being the university archivist at the University of Illinois. And at the time, I put together a really pathetic resume talking about how I had worked in the undergraduate library and how I'd been a bookseller at Barnes & Noble. But otherwise, I didn't feel like he would ever choose me. But he said, the starting pay is $20, and I'm like, yeah, sign me up. And so that's what happened. And I started working in archives, and I grew to really love it because as a musician, you practice and practice and practice. And then you show up at an audition and you get sent home after 3 minutes because you botch an orchestral excerpt. And when I was processing collections, everything would stay. The inventory would stay, the arrangement of the collections would stay. And so that was very therapeutic to me that I could create order from chaos and provide access to resources and information. Mm-hmm. And that gave me a lot of confidence to apply at that time for both my doctorate in music performance and also library science, focusing on archives. And at the time, I was just like, let fate decide the next step. And then I got accepted to both programs. So then I was like, all right, buckle up. I'm just going to do it. And so I got a lot of wonderful experience at the University of Illinois, working in a lot of repositories, institutional archives, special collections, music archives. And I just took a little bit longer on my degree to get both sets of classes, cash out on one, then cash out ABD on my doctorate. And from there, I got a job at Michigan State University as a faculty archivist. And so I had been working with archive space in governance capacity. I had volunteered to serve and lead the development prioritization sub-team, and I led the staff interface enhancement working group. And I founded the usability sub-team and ended my 4-year term as chair of the Users Advisory Council. And so by that time, I was very familiar with archive space, both the nuts and bolts of it, back end, and also as a power user. And I knew about Lyrasis, and I was familiar with several employees at Lyrasis. And so when the job opened up to sell archive space, I was like, wow. I know it like the back of my hand. I can just jump right in. And that's what happened.
I think the connection between musicians and librarians is so interesting. I spoke to a woman named Megan Press earlier this season who wrote a book called Get the Job about academic hiring. And we were talking about some of the strengths that she has from being a musician around performance and how that translates to instruction, and also some of the differences between hiring musicians and hiring library workers. And I don't know, I just think it's really interesting. I also think it's interesting that I tend to think about libraries and archives as sort of a lower paid, it's kind of a precarious employment sometimes. And the one thing that is more precarious, I think, is probably working as a professional musician.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, Lydia, about how you titled yourself, because early in my career, I was doing the typical grant-funded positions in archives and museums. And I definitely have a handle that I still sometimes use for roving historian, because I was just going to be like, all right, I'm just going to get myself a semi and just go around the United States doing history stuff.
Doing history, yeah. Or like, I don't know, there's traveling nurses too. I think traveling nurses are better paid than traveling archivists.
Yes, I think you're right.
Lydia, you kind of talked about really being a Lyrasis user and that transitioning you to working for Lyrasis, but was there any particular reason for you, or for you, Marcella, about why you decided to move out of archives in particular and into supporting archives, I suppose?
One of the reasons that I took the job at Lyrasis was it was fully remote, which is not always easy to find in the cultural heritage field. We tend to be pretty, we need to be in the office. We need to be working with the stuff, with the things.
Yeah.
And in my particular area of the world, I live in Kansas, there aren't a whole lot of archives here. This was the first job I got where I didn't have some other major life event happening at the same time. I didn't have to move. I wasn't also getting married, those kinds of things. So that was like a low-key attraction of I can just start a new job and I don't have to do anything else at the same time. But specifically with Lyrasis, like Lydia, I knew some folks who worked here through the community supported technologies. I had been an archive space user in my previous job. So it was like I was familiar with them. They seemed like nice people. It seemed like a nice organization to work for. There was also, I have been for several years thinking about some kind of career transition. I've kind of burned out on, a lot of things. In my particular role, I was doing project management. I wasn't really getting to work with collections anyway. And I think that's why a lot of us get into the field, is we want to work with the stuff. We want to work with the people who are working with the stuff. And I wasn't really doing that anymore. I was looking for a new challenge. And my particular role, it was new at Lyrasis. Nobody had really quite had this role before. So I would be starting something. I would be learning a lot of different things. So there were a lot of different reasons why I decided to make this transition. And it was nice because it was not completely leaving the field.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely been thinking about that. Like, what do I want to do instead of working in archives and museums? So this was nice because it wasn't that, but it was a step in that sort of direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Lydia, what about you? Did you have a particular impetus for leaving archives?
Yeah, I was also needing a change. I was finding it very difficult because my husband is a professor at Michigan State, and he has a very specialized position. He's a professor of food science with a specialty in fruit and vegetable processing. And to get a job in that area, there's only maybe just a handful of food science positions that open each year, and they might be as niche as a professor of mollusks. And so he was just like, I'm not moving. And so I'm like, well, again, for me also in mid-Michigan, there's not that many other opportunities. And so as a faculty archivist librarian at Michigan State, you have an expectation not only of excellence in your job, in my case as a collections archivist, doing a lot of processing and overseeing the processing and monitoring the backlog and things like that, but I was really attracted to community building. I did a lot of professional service, and I still do. So I've been very involved in the Society of American Archivists. I currently am finishing up my term on council, which is the highest governing body for the National Organization of Archives and Archivists. And so connecting across institutions to build something was so attractive to me that actually in my role at Michigan State, they were saying, you focus on your job, come on. And I just love being able to collaborate across institutions beyond just our own institutional repository stuff. So when that remote opportunity came up, I really leaped at it. It's still kind of bittersweet to me. I feel like an archivist without collections. And so instead, I get my kicks from going to estate sales and looking through the physical remains of people and think about whether I could have been friends with them if I had known them. And that's, yeah. And that's the way it is with archives too, piecing together a person's life, seeing that inner world. And again, you're stuck in the basement usually, and you don't see that many people, but you do kind of think, if I had met you, we could have been friends.
Yeah.
That is definitely the thing I miss, is going into the stacks, opening some boxes, seeing what's there.
That's a really interesting story about connecting too, like thinking about, Lydia, what you were saying about really liking to connect across organizations. I don't think of archiving as a connection focused work, but both of you were saying that is it's the person, it's not the materials that you're connecting to.
It's both. Like we also really, just speaking for ourselves, I would get kind of geeked out about pneumatic tapes and all kinds of weird formats. And I'm sure we all have our battle scars and stories about dealing with like cat pee infested collections and like, rusty paper clips under the fingernails. And it helps to have a lot of stories about weird stuff we find.
Yeah.
My next question was about working outside of archives and what's the same and what's different. And both of you, we mentioned the possibility of remote work and that being more possible outside of archives. And so what are some other things that you might, I'm thinking about, maybe, for example, pay or benefits or time off? Are there differences there?
Yeah,
definitely.
I mean, I think Lyrasis has some fabulous time off options. I don't know that archives always have, and I don't know that corporate either also always has. I miss my state health insurance. I miss the unlimited sick time that I had as a state employee. I don't know about you, Lydia.
Yeah, exactly the same. I would say that health insurance is definitely a detractor because as a fully remote organization, they have to kind of pick that middle ground of what works kind of across the entire country and also internationally as best they can. And so for me, that means that kind of work means doesn't really work in my area. For example, there are no in-network pediatric dentists within like a 2-hour range.
Man.
Yeah, so that's something that's ongoing, and that can be challenging, but like Marcella said, the time off is nice, and also the flexibility for me, since I have 2 young children, of being there to see them off at the bus and being there to let them in when they come home at 3:30 is just amazing. I couldn't conceive of that earlier, but it came at the best possible time since they both started public school around the time that I transitioned to this job. And I hadn't even thought about that earlier, about how I'd be able to get away and help when the seat time in a physical archives goes all the way to 5 o'clock.
Right.
In terms of pay, that was also a compelling boost for me. As a pretty much an essentially processing archivist, I wasn't very high in the hierarchy. And so when I came to this role in, quote, nonprofit software industry, then that was much more attractive to me in terms of compensation. I'm on a team of 3 people total, so there's a lot riding on my role. And what also is different is I'd say that in my role, I'm able to connect with archives, understand the constraints and the issues that they're facing, but I've also had to flex in a way that I didn't know I could, such as creating sales forecasts and the unpleasant tasks of doing account renewals and thinking about how to play battleship with our competitors and stuff like that. But that's how I draw upon my music background too, of being competitive. The joke about trumpet players, which I'm not a trumpet player, but it's applicable to violinists, is that they will come up to each other, shake their hands tightly enough to crack some knuckles and say, I'm better than you. And so that's kind of what I have to do when I'm going toe-to-toe with competitors.
Yeah. And that competition doesn't exist in the archives world? Like you're not competing for...
Oh, I think it does.
Yeah.
In different ways. I mean, I have definitely worked in institutions where they were in competition with other institutions for collection material, whether or not they would admit that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is a good point, Lydia, about not just about like the battleship and having to flex, but also one of the attractions for this job for me was getting to work with lots of different archives. So, I mean, I've always been somebody who likes learning new things, and it's cool to see, like, what do you all have? What do you all work with? Where are you from? And all of that.
You're making me think about something that comes up sometimes, which is people in some of my surveys will talk about wanting to move up, wanting a more advanced position, but not wanting to move into a position that requires management of people.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if this is a step like this would be an opportunity to learn new skills, to maybe level up your position, but not have to be a person manager.
Yeah, those positions are rare. I think that did work out for me in my role. I did get a pay raise. I do not currently supervise anybody. And it definitely does feel like, and not necessarily a step up, but definitely at least a step in parallel, doing something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in not just in archives, but in a lot of fields, it is hard to find a job where you can get a promotion without also having to supervise people.
Yeah.
And I think that's always something people need to be aware of about themselves, of can you supervise? Do you want to supervise? Do you like supervising? Because it's going to come up.
For me, that was also the case. I don't supervise anybody. And in my past archivist position, there was a rigorous tenure approach. And so I was leading up to that dossier point. You had to pull together your publications and also your professional service work and document everything, processing stats and wins of all different types. And it was very intimidating, and it is a very slow process. And so transitioning to this industry point, I began as the baseline level of an outreach and engagement coordinator. And after a few years, I'd say 3 to 4 years, I said, well, I would like to see about advancing up some. And so it was a discussion with my manager. It was a discussion with HR. It was also, we had a junior colleague come on as well. And so there was agreement that there should be a distinction in my title and also the pay grade to demonstrate my more senior role. And so that was really refreshing to see that there's more of a nimble approach for advancing, even if it's advancing in place.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting point, because often when we're working in archives or libraries, we're working for a government agency, which I think of as being less nimble in that sense of having more rigidly defined roles. I wanted to ask too, I think about retention, and I think about the length of time that you might stay in a library role, or like, for example, an archives role. If you're working to get tenure, then perhaps you would consider after you get tenure that you want to stay there for quite some time. I often contrast this with my partner who works in tech. And to me, like, if you work in tech and you've been in there, if you've been in your role for 5 years, like you're a veteran.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, this interruption is to let you know that if you're someone who hires, someone who wants to learn how to hire, or if you're in charge of professional development for your library, I've put together an online, self-paced training on hiring basics, which you can purchase through Navarre Library Services. You can learn more by going to hiringlibrarians.com/classes. Do you have any thoughts about that retention, specific to Lyrasis maybe, or just outside of archives?
I mean, Lyrasis, I would say, is a mixed bag. There are definitely some folks who have been around for a really long time. And then Lyrasis has also hired a lot of us in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say. They've had a pretty big growth phase. I was in a tenure track position. I got tenure and I still left. What I have seen in my experience is it is easy to get stuck. Whether or not it's a tenure track position, it is easy to get stuck. You've worked in the same place for a really long time. You become kind of embittered, I think. You become that person we've always done it this way. And for me, I was starting to feel that way at my last job. And I was like, I need to get out. This is not right. This is not good for me. This is not good for the institution. And I think that's something that, like, it's good to be aware of. Like, you want to stick around long enough to make a positive impact, to help the institution to understand, like, workflows and processes and what the bigger picture is for the institution. But you also don't want to become a hindrance, and you also don't want to burn out. I don't know if that's been your feeling, Lydia, or not.
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same. I've kind of known when it's time to go, when I feel like I'm talking and nobody cares. And that's been that way for past positions too, like Marcella said, about being a change agent and also a force to positively impact your surroundings. And so it's easy anywhere you are to kind of stall out from that when just relationships get too comfortable, and some institutional inertia comes into place. And so, I'd say with Lyrasis, I'd say that the field is constantly evolving, and it is very fast-paced, especially in our institution, particularly because we are seeing impacts on the profession on a broad scale. And so for me, the impacts of recent political actions and greater funding jeopardy across archival institutions, this impacts our work because the institutions have less capacity for funding, which means that they may have to cancel some subscriptions and memberships and things like that. And so there's not so much the risk I feel of feeling stagnant. And it does seem like Lyrasis does compensate well. I would say that the retirement benefits are not as good as my husband's university, and circling back to health insurance. Again, since it's a small nonprofit with around 100 employees, they just don't have that negotiation power to get a really attractive package for employees. So there are reasons why somebody may leave. And like Marcella said, especially if you get typecast into things like, for me, as an archivist, I could go a lot of places, but now that I'm in sales, I do feel that concern of being typecast for future opportunities. Like they might say, oh, we've got an opportunity in sales. And I was drawn to this role because I am an archivist. I don't identify as being a salesperson. And so that can be frustrating.
I wonder if we might transition now to talking a little bit about how hiring works specifically at Lyrasis. Would one of you be willing to just sort of walk us through the hiring process there?
Yeah. Lydia, do you have more recent experience than me? Because it's been a few months since I've been on a search committee, but I also talked to our HR person recently, so I don't know.
I have also served on a search committee, but it's been about a year. So Marcella, do you want to start, and I'll see what I can fill in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So specifically for Lyrasis, we just got an HR person who's more dedicated to the hiring process. So I think it's probably changed a little bit since either Lydia or I were on a search committee. But typically, job postings always start internally. So a Lyrasis employee kind of gets first chance, first opportunity for any new jobs that are hiring. And then usually there's 2 rounds of interviews, I believe. Everything's virtual. Typically, cameras are always on. It's always through Zoom. The first round of interviews is usually just with the hiring manager, the HR person that I mentioned, and maybe the senior director of that particular division, depending on that situation. Our HR person's usually pretty involved in the screening process. She told me, like, not necessarily for the more technical roles. It might be that the hiring manager is doing more of that screening because they understand what they need, what skill set they need more closely at that point. And then a second round interview was probably going to vary a lot depending on the role. For when I was hired, I had meetings with search committee and HR, clearly, but also I had a meeting with an internal stakeholders group because it was a new role and people wanted to be able to ask questions and kind of find out more about who I was, that kind of thing. We hired the director for the community supported technologies. She had to give presentations to governance boards, that kind of thing. So that piece is really going to vary, I think. But I also know that our HR person, she's really thoughtful about trying to make the process as efficient as possible and as least intimidating as possible, I would say, for people who are applying for jobs and thinking about working here.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, Lydia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, sure. I would say that positions at Lyrasis are very competitive. So from my experience serving on a search committee for a data migrations person, we received over 100 applications. And so I'm not sure on our up-to-date practices, but Lyrasis hasn't jumped blindly into using AI. We are considering its applications, but as far as I know, in terms of resume and cover letter screenings, I think it's still person mediated. So if we get a ton of applications, which always does happen, I believe that some member of HR will probably do the first pass of just seeing if they're even qualified in the first place. And so for most of Lyrasis employees, unless you're doing fiscal or something like that, that really doesn't need that library perspective, that's a foundational aspect of working at Lyrasis, is that background working in libraries or archives to begin with. And then also having, particularly in our division related to hosting, having previous experience with the platforms that we either support as a community or else provide hosting services is very important. For other units such as content and scholarly communications unit, having a background in scholarly communications and e-resources, including licenses and procurement, is also important. So that practical application is very attractive. And yeah, so the HR person will do the first pass of just whittling it down to something more manageable, like maybe 30, 40 applications. And then the hiring manager will get involved and help whittle it down to probably about 10 or 12. And then the search committee, at least from my experience, has a rubric, an internal rubric that we use looking at some key aspects of the job posting. So usually, again, these elements that I described earlier of practical work experience working in libraries and archives, and also relevant experience relating to that particular job. And so from there, we try to whittle it down to, I don't know, probably about 5. And then we do those preliminary screenings, like Marcella said. So it would probably be the hiring manager, the HR person, maybe the division head. For higher profile positions, such as the head of HR and head of marketing and communications, sometimes they even bring in the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Again, because of the emerging political environment, I'm not sure how that will go going forward. But Lyrasis as an organization is very dedicated to values of inclusivity and making sure that everyone is welcome at our institution. So, that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
That's a really good overview from both of you. I think it's a clear picture of the way the process happens. I want to maybe broaden a little bit. I hear from a lot of people that are interested in transitioning out of archives or out of libraries, but they're not quite sure how to do it. So I wonder if maybe we can hear first from Marcella and then from Lydia. Do you have any suggestions for first steps for transitioning out of archives?
Yeah, I think first steps are if you are gainfully employed in a stable position, take your time. Think really hard about what you want to do. Like I said, I took several years to kind of think about what do I want to do? Where do I want to go from here? And one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a therapist that I've been sharing with others is kind of do a self-inventory of what do you like and not like about jobs that you have held. And it's not just like the broad things, but being super nitpicky. So like it might be something like, I don't like managing people. When really it's more like, I like mentoring and coaching, but I don't like having to nag people to finish their timesheet. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of tasks and skills. And then I think also looking at your strengths and weaknesses. Like, I'm really good at project management. Okay, so dig into that. What kind of project management? Is this something that you would want to do on a daily basis? If you see yourself doing this, for the next 5 years, does that sound fine, or does that fill you with dread? Like, looking at those kinds of things, I think are really important internally. And then I think externally, it's also really important to kind of do some networking. And I'm not talking like go to a happy hour and do small talk, but like if the field that you're looking at has conferences in your region, try to go to one. Try to find people that you either know or that your colleagues and friends might know who have that job, and do some kind of informational interview with them. Find out as much as you can about that field to go, okay, does this feel like a good fit? Or does this not feel like a good fit? Is this something where I'm going to have to go back to school and get another graduate degree or a certificate? Like, doing that kind of research, I think, is really important before trying to just find a new job.
That's some wonderful advice. I think particularly if you have a current job and hopefully it's not a job that you really, really hate.
Right, yes. If you can stomach it.
Yeah, being able to be deliberate and focused about what you want.
Well,
So,
and if you're not gainfully employed, or if you really do hate your job, like if you work for an academic institution, what other jobs are there at the university or the educational center that you're working at? Maybe they're not exact fits for what you're doing now, but could you make the case to, like, in your application, in your CV, your resume, or look in your your online newspapers classified ads, like what is going on just in your community locally, where if you need a job super fast, is there something that you could do that would expand your skills?
mm-hmm. That's great. Lydia, any advice from you?
I totally agree about doing informational interviews. An approach that I have tried that seems to work pretty well is find people that are doing the jobs that you'd like to do and maybe send a connection request on LinkedIn. And as part of that, say, I'm interested in considering a career pivot. And you do something that I'm really interested in. And I was wondering if I could do a brief informational interview with you that wouldn't last more than 30 minutes. And I would highly recommend including a booking link. That way it's super easy. They just click on your link and they find a time that works for them. And so that way it's no back and forth about, okay, sure, what day, what time, that kind of stuff. Make it easy, easy, easy. And then from there, if you can, send the questions in advance, so that way they have an idea what to prepare, and keep it very focused within that time limit too. And also follow up with a thank you note. Sometimes they may offer to review your resume and maybe even a cover letter, and that can be super helpful. So when thinking about transitioning beyond archives or librarianship into something like an industry adjacent job, there can be some repackaging that you would need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they're not going to care about your processing statistics. They're not going to necessarily care about all of the exhibits that you've done over the years. And so that can be really hard to let go of. And I know that's a pot calling the kettle black, because my resume is 20 pages. I don't like that, but I also refuse to let it go because, dang it, I worked really hard for all those things. But I do know that that's not necessarily serving me in the best way. So for many industry jobs, particularly more industry like working in a bank or as a knowledge management professional, then like 1 page, 2 pages, but don't even consider going 3 pages. And then another thing that you will have to do, especially if you're going to apply for an institution where you have a higher probability of AI bots that are screening the applications, or especially federal jobs, they all are very specific. And sometimes whether it is AI or whether it's a HR specialist that has no connection to the field, they're going to be looking for keywords and that's it. Like they can't string together and draw the connections that somebody in the field would. So what I would recommend for repackaging things is that it's often a habit among library and information science people to basically just rehash their job description, like I do this, but also take a more of an industry perspective of I have done this, this is the outcome. They are very results oriented. And so you need to think very strategically about bragging in the right way that matters to them. And also use language that they would connect with. I cringe at it, but it is true that it's a different lingo. Talk about stakeholders, talk about probabilities, talk about return on investment and stuff like that. And that will give you more of that edge, because sometimes you're competing against people who have MBAs. But they might not know the field that way. And so you have to make that compelling case that your experience, your lived experience, is worth even more than some shiny MBA.
I think A beautiful sentiment. Your lived experience is worth more than a shiny MBA. That's the world I want to live in.
Yeah.
I want to give each of you a chance to just say anything that we maybe didn't get to that you're really hoping to say. Marcella, I know that you have a hard deadline, so maybe you'll go first, and then you feel free to just drop off the call when you need to. And I'll say thank you so much now, and then I'll email you to say thank you again.
Yeah. I think one thing to think about when looking at something that's kind of archives adjacent, library adjacent, or completely different field, when you're looking at job postings, when you are trying to think about yourself in this role, a couple years from now, something like that, what is your emotional response? There was a period a few years ago where I was looking at lots of corporate jobs, like marketing, writing, records management, those kinds of things, trying to use transferable skill sets, right? And the language, the verbiage, the attitude, it hurt my soul. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face it. So, like, if you're having that kind of reaction, follow your gut. That's probably not a good sign that that's something that you want to do. But if you're thinking about it and you're a little bit excited and you're a little bit scared, apply, try it, see what happens, get some more experience. If nothing else, at least you've updated your resume. And to Lydia's point, I think it is important to have like a couple different versions. Keep the 20-page CV, but also have like the 2-page resume.
Thank you, Marcella. And I know that you have to go. So if you want to go, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on your show, Emily.
Thank you, Marcella. It's been great talking with you too. For me, I would say that I have served on the Society of American Archivists mentoring committee, and I've led it as well. And so when I work with mentees and they share their resume, especially for newer graduates, there is a risk that there's some imposter syndrome. And so I see a lot of newer graduates with resumes that all look the same. And so what I mean by that is there's kind of an imposter syndrome of just like, oh, this is what an archivist does, and I need to fit myself to that role that I'm hoping for. And so, yeah, it is important to tailor your resume and especially your cover letter to demonstrate how you fit into the role. But also, especially since I spent the first decade of my professional career as a performing musician, don't count yourself short. Like those other paths that we take to get to where we are should not be a point of shame, and also shouldn't be something that you feel like you wasted your time or your life on before you found your path. And so I'm not shy about talking about my background as a musician, but when you do, make sure that you map it to the qualities and the expertise that you can bring to that role. And so how I do it with being a classical music performer is high standards, detail-oriented work, persistence, and also for me, those auditions are what tanked my career ultimately, but it gave me a very important lesson that anything is easier than playing the Don Juan excerpt. And so when I have to go through almost 200 rows of account renewals each quarter, and when I have to create an RFP, those are really tedious, very exhausting kind of things. And I also have done keynotes for various conferences too. And these experiences not only are demanding, but also, frankly, terrifying. And so when I'm in these situations of adversity, I just go, would you rather be doing this or auditioning on Don Juan? And I go, oh, anything but Don Juan. I can do anything but that. And so it really helps put things in perspective for me. So if you've gone through fire in any type of way before you found where you are now, leverage that as a strength. You lived through it. And so that is something, that experience and that knowledge is something that nobody can take away from you. So use it.
Lydia, that's such wonderful advice and really Like beautiful and funny. I really like the thought that you don't have to leave your past behind. Your past is useful and has shaped you and is part of the fabric of who you are. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me for the podcast today. I really appreciate all the hard work you have done to get us here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you again about the Archival Workers Collective. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to my guests, Lydia Tang and Marcella Huggard. And now, the fine print. One more plug for my Hiring Basics training. You can find a link to register by going to hiringlibrarians.com/classes. If you'd like to support this podcast and my work on hiringlibrarians.com, you can find my PayPal by visiting the site, or you can go to patreon.com/hiringlibrarians. I'd also love to hear from you about any little thing at all. You can email me at hiringlibrarians@gmail.com. The theme tune was written and performed by Matthew Travers. Thanks, Matthew.